You really should be eating less of this after fasting. Now, I know when you look at fasting, it's very, very liberating because you can say, I can just take a break from food and then I have a lot more flexibility with what I can eat afterwards during my eating window. And for many, that is true. Like, fasting was exceptionally liberating for me because I went from trying to eat 6 square meals per day, trying to kind of follow that pattern, and it just wasn't working for my weight loss. In fact, it was just making me frustrated. So I completely understand that, and I feel like if fasting works for you and eating whatever you want during your eating window just works, then you can keep doing that. But for those of us that are trying to find our way to just get the most out of it, looking at new research, there's some cool stuff that we can look at. So the first study I want to reference is one that is very positive. It kind of shows us, at least in rodent models, how much changes when we fast, okay? So it was published in the Journal of Lipid Research, and it had rats eat either ad libitum, just whatever they wanted to, or did a 46-hour fast. They found at the end of a 46-hour fast, the amount of genes that were expressed related to fat oxidation had gone up 50%, meaning their entire blueprint of how their body uses fuel had changed. 50% increase in genes being expressed related to fat utilization. So the body just got better at overall using fats at a genetic level. This is huge. But there was a 70% decrease in the ability to utilize glucose. Okay, so what am I getting at with what you should be eating less of after your fast? Well, I want to paint a picture in a little bit of a different way. Okay, let's say you took a break from eating for 20 hours, and then you broke that fast and you just ate a bunch of cake, a bunch of pizza, a bunch of steaks, a bunch of everything, right? Well, in theory, at a surface level, you'd think your body would just soak up all those nutrients and get what it needs out of it, right? But when you dig deeper, you start understanding that the body got really good at using fats during this fast. So if I sat down and I ate a bunch of pizza, and I ate a bunch of cake, and I ate a bunch of just everything, my body would actually be really, really good at using the fats from those fuels. Like it would incinerate those fats because that's what it's been doing for the length of this fast. As a matter of fact, there's a 2022 study published in Scientific Reports that looked at this. It took a look at subjects that were doing intermittent fasting for 5 days in a row compared to people that were doing a 12-hour fast for 5 days in a row. And they found that when they fed them a high-fat meal on the 6th day, that their ability to oxidize fats had increased tremendously. They used the fat from that fuel tremendously. So this is all good news, right? Except it's missing the one important piece. If we're using fats really well, what are we not using well? I think you've got an idea, right? But let's take a look at a study so we can have some clarity. So there was a study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology. It had subjects do a 13-hour fast or a 72-hour fast. At the end of these fasts, they found, particularly in the longer fast, in the 72-hour fast, the ability to utilize glucose went down markedly. And the ability to utilize fat went up, which is no surprise, but glucose tolerance went down. Their ability to handle carbohydrates. Okay, so now you understand, it looks as though we should not be eating a high amount of carbohydrates after fasting, right? So this is what we need to be eating less of on a fasting day. Now, I'm someone that really takes a non-dogmatic approach to nutrition, particularly with fasting, because in the fasting world, sometimes you just get pigeonholed as someone that might be anti-carb, and I'm not anti-carb. I think carbs have a place, okay? So we have a double-edged sword here. The most important thing, first of all, is that above any of this, you need to be eating more protein, period, after your fast, okay? You can be granted a lot of amnesty, and I'm going to break down what you should do about your carbohydrates, but the first thing, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't say that protein needs to be just the #1 thing that you consume. Absolutely, because then you give yourself a lot more slack with the other things that you eat. And that's what people miss out on. They forget that if you just prioritize the protein during your eating window, you do have more flexibility, but that flexibility has to be earned. If you want something that tastes really good during your fast to get your protein up, you're gonna be super stoked to hear that Bowmar Nutrition, who I've had on this channel before, I've met with them, I've helped them formulate some new products, and now they have gotten rid of all artificial sweeteners out of their products. They're getting rid of all artificial ingredients. So now everything is sweetened with either stevia or monk fruit or allulose. So we're not having any of that stuff anymore. So people were really stoked on that because they're known as having really, really, really good tasting protein powders, like really good, like they have a strawberry milkshake flavor, just unreal, cookies and cream, all this stuff. But people were like, oh, there was sucralose in it. It was kind of a big hurdle for me too. So I had to use their products that didn't have that stuff in it. But then I met with Josh and said, hey man, let's like try to change this. So they changed it. So now I popped a link down below and you can check out their protein powders, which now are sweetened with stevia. And in my opinion, they taste better than they did before. Stuff is unbelievable and a great way to get protein in a way that tastes unbelievable. So if you like whey protein and you're not doing a plant-based thing, this is the way to go. Like whey protein, in my opinion, is really, really great. Plant-based proteins are really, really great. Practical applications for both. I know a lot of people like whey because of the benefits of it. So that link is down below, but you can save a couple of bucks on whatever products you want to get from Bowmar now that they got rid of the artificial ingredients. So when we start talking about how to reduce this glucose load, like how does this look? Because if you were to break your fast and just eat a bunch of carbs during your eating window, you might not actually notice anything negative happening on the surface because maybe you're active and you're burning up that glucose and things like that. But that does not change the fact that at a higher level outside of our control, at a genetic level, gene expression, we have less ability to deal with those carbs. We just flat out do. It does not mean that at the end of a fast during your eating period, you need to go keto. But on the days that you fast, you need to be making a concerted effort to do a few things. You either keep the carbs out of the equation entirely and then bring them back after you've had food back in the system, or you increase fiber, increase protein, and moderately decrease carbohydrates so you have less of an impact. So you may or may not realize this, but think about it like this. You have 100, 200 grams of carbs in your eating period, and then you don't sleep well that night. You blame not sleeping well on the fasting, because that's a common thing. Fasting can sometimes impair sleep because you just were stressed out and levels of norepinephrine and everything were elevated, adrenaline. But now it gets us questioning. If glucose tolerance goes down, perhaps the reason you're not sleeping is because your glucose levels are remaining unstable as a result of simply fasting. It doesn't mean carbohydrates are bad. It means after fasting, it's simple with the research. You don't utilize the carbs as well. But it's interesting because on the other side of the coin, we know that fasting improves insulin sensitivity. So on one hand, you can get away with carbohydrates because you're insulin sensitive. And that's true. But on the other hand, you can only have so much because you've lost, in some studies, 70% of the gene expression associated with carbs. So what does this spell out for you? You should reduce your carbohydrate intake to about 30% of what you would do on a day you're not fasting. It's that simple. So if we know that you have a 70% decrease in gene expression of things associated with glucose oxidation, you can roughly estimate that you probably have 70% less ability to deal with glucose. That is a very colloquial, loose way of putting it, but also a safe way of putting it. And what I would recommend is that you space these carbs out accordingly. You don't just slam them all at once. You have this 30% of your normal carbohydrate intake spread across your eating window so that your body has the ability to deal with it. Now, what is speculated is that some of the glucose intolerance might come from the increases in growth hormone that occur during a fast. When we are fasting, growth hormone elevates, not to astronomical levels that are going to make you build muscle out of thin air, but it elevates enough to spare muscle. And it elevates enough to potentially impair insulin signaling. So what happens is when growth hormone's high, insulin signaling can go down, which can sometimes cause more insulin. That's a whole different discussion. But what I'm suggesting here is that when we're fasting, we become somewhat glucose intolerant because of the growth hormone that's present. And once the fast is done, it slowly comes back. Okay, so you fast on Monday. During your eating period, you eat 30% of your carbs that you normally would eat. And then Tuesday, a non-fasting day, you eat carbs as you normally would because your glucose tolerance is probably back. You see, it's a temporary thing. but we need to be eating less of them because our body simply loses the ability to deal with them well. And rather than have an abundance of something that isn't working well, why don't we just fine tune it so we can tailor our diet accordingly and get the best result? I'll see you tomorrow.